My name's Chloe Thomas. I'm an e-commerce marketing problem solver and the host of the e-commerce master plan podcast. And I'm going to do my best to moderate this session. The session is all about what best practices from B2C e-commerce should the B2B e-commerce industry focus on in order to catch up. I think much of that particular statement is open to question and debate. So I think this is going to be a lively session ahead of us. Before we get into the questions, though, I would like to get each of our panellists just to very quickly introduce themselves so you know who we've got up here for you to learn from. We'll start on the left-hand side with Alex, if that's all right.
Hi, I'm Alex Snook. I'm Senior E-commerce Manager for B2B at Diageo. So for those who don't know, it's one of the biggest drinks suppliers. So we have Baileys, Guinness, Smirnoff, to name a few. And my job is to work with wholesalers and cash and carry across on and off trade. So anyone from Booker, Bestway, Matthew Clark, of which B2B in e-commerce represents more than half of our P&L from a GB perspective.
I'm James Wilkes from Greenhous Group. I'm Marketing and Digital Information Director. We're one of the largest UK motor dealers, and we predominantly do a large amount of our business in the fleet world.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricardo Davila. I'm a B2B expert. I have worked 20 years in that business, 10 years for a manufacturer, a global market leader, and 10 years for a wholesaler who is also a global market leader. The first company, 5 billion euro sales, the second one, 22 billion euro sales.
My name is Neil Campbell. I'm Growth Director with a company called Lingo 24. We are a language translation business that specialises in the B2B space, so deal with a lot of our customers with very large product catalogues, looking to get large amounts of content quickly to their international markets.
Okay, so I think you'd all agree we have quite an impressive panel up here who I think between the four of you cover pretty much every single aspect going in the B2B e-commerce space. So we should have some nice lively debate for you this afternoon, I hope. Oh man, where do we start with this particular question? I think let's start with my personal favourite, which is marketing. When it comes to the B2B e-commerce world, what should they be learning from the 10, 15 years of B2C e-commerce learning that we've had in the marketing space, getting customers to that website? Any volunteer to get us started?
I'll start
Alex?
if you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suppose the biggest thing is that actually you need to have an omnichannel approach. The idea of research online, purchase offline still applies. It's, we've got people who, quite frankly, they've had these pubs, from a Diageo perspective, had pubs or maybe convenience stores for years. They don't necessarily want to move online, but they do want to have a look before they go in, because that going into a cash and carry is kind of that ritual of seeing people catching up, and it's not something they want to lose. But if we don't reinforce the messages that you see in depot or in or through telesales, for example, or a brochure, you're not actually having that full connected journey, and that's really key. But actually, I suppose the difference is the message that you would have from a consumer perspective needs to be completely different because the mindset's different. So it's no good if me talking about the consumer Baileys message, because actually people want to know that 80% of Baileys is sold in the run-up to Christmas, so stock up now. Here's your profitability. Here's why you should stock it in your pub. Those are the differentiations that you need to have to, I suppose, be relevant to that particular customer.
So it's still an omnichannel approach.
Yeah.
Everything goes.
Fundamental.
But you've got to get that message right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. James?
We had a discussion earlier. It also is down to the product you're selling. From our perspective, if we advertise a leasing deal on a vehicle, if you're in a business or an individual, then you would both be interested in that leasing deal. The difference is the VAT that you would pay. So, but actually the product there would be the same. So unless you're a large leasing company, and then you'd be looking at ordering thousands of cars. But it is down to the product as well, I think.
Okay.
Yes, I would like to add something. If we look to that question from the wholesaler's perspective, I would say that brand strategy would be also an added value from the B2C side to the B2B perspective. Because in the B2B as wholesaler, sometimes the brand is the sales team and not the logo or the image of it. And that is a daily job from the B2C's perspective. And working the two sides, I would put the brand strategy as one of the main bullet points to be learned from the B2C side.
I think the big thing that we see is the opportunity to get it right in B2B for a couple of reasons. We tend to have larger value customers, so you can spend more time getting to know the customer individually to really focus on the message, and then taking that into the personalization segmentation piece, because typically when people are going to the website, they've got to log in to access their rates or whatever else. Right away from the start of the customer journey, you know who they are, so you can really target the message right, you can get and focus on specifically what you want to get to that buyer. So I think a lot of it is actually where B2B is a step up in terms of, maybe a bit behind, but could overtake the B2C with getting these bits right.
It does sound, listening to the four of you, that there's kind of elements where B2B is actually already ahead on the marketing front, but then there's also spaces where the B2C there's still something to learn from, and I guess brand is probably one of those key ones. I guess, Alex, when you work for one of the best branded organisations in the world, from the product point of view,
Yeah.
do you find that it's on the brand front, it's the consumer side, the consumer marketing that leads everything, or is that branding important? In any sense,
branding's important, and I guess where we're lucky at Diageo, you've got a lot of brand familiarity and brand recognition. I've worked in e-commerce for 10 years or so, and until I joined Diageo 2.5 years ago, it was all consumer side. And one of the biggest things, I mean, I've spent years talking about fixing the basics, and it's like one of the most boring topics. You go, I need an image, you need product description, and you kind of think, okay, I've moved on, and then you go into B2B, and 20 to sometimes in some cases 60% of business going through online, but they don't have images or even up-to-date images. They don't have product descriptions. They don't tell me how can I make a perfect gin and tonic? How can I serve a pint of Guinness properly? And if we can't help drive sales out at the other end, what's the point of trying to sell the product? Because you just end up with no one knowing what to do with it. And so brand familiarity is really important, but actually it's the category story that's, I think, becomes more important. So if I'm working with any of my customers, it's kind of going category approach first. How can I help tell a category story where my brands will leverage as a part of that, but actually, tell me what's the right range for my pub. Tell me how to sell that. What can I do? How does that help my profitability? Oh, and here's some brands that will help you do that. Brand familiarity will then come as a part of that.
So it's almost just the content piece is the first bit to get fixed, where you've got, I guess, trying to think of how I see spirits in pubs. You've got the collateral or the point of sale, which you need to be able to see as a retailer on the website, not just what the bottle looks like.
It's point of sale. It's the back bar. It's the what's the right fonts. Should I have a Guinness font? We know that if you have a standalone font, you'll probably sell more as a result of just being on like a normal tea bar. Mm-hmm. Those things are the kind of things you need to be help guiding owners with, and it's the same as if you're a convenience store and you've got a 1 metre bay versus a 3 metre. There's no point having a convenience store with a load of Johnny Walker Blue collecting dust in the bottom because they thought it was a great product, but do you want that in a convenience store? Probably not. You want a Smirnoff 70cl. That's your core kind of products to be focusing on.
So a lot of content and education.
Yeah.
So do the rest of you find that content and education is something which you could learn a lot from the B2C side of things? Anyone jump in on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I saw here a lot of booths talking about standards and classifications and softwares to support the data management from the B2B perspective, and that is related to the content as well. I mean, again, if we talk about the wholesaler, the consolidation of the data is a mess because they are in different countries, different regions, with different kinds of making business. Can be online, can be the shop, can be ERP, whatever. I mean, to consolidate all these and to have only one content to go to the end user as a B2C business, it's a long journey. And I'm sure they are struggling here and they are doing their best to learn. Absolutely.
James, do you find that in the world of cars?
Yeah.
Is there education required?
Well, I think we've when you buy in lots of cars, what they're doing is they're buying the cars that people are buying, if that makes sense. So if you're a large fleet dealer, say Europe Car want to buy 1,000 cars, they're going to look at the cars that people are hiring. So they're more concerned about your reputation of how you're going to handle their vehicles, how you're going to, what kind of site it's on, how trustworthy you are with delivery times and things like that. Whereas a customer's more interested in how nice and touchy-feely the car is. So I think the synergy's there, but if you're B2B, they do need a different kind of information, which obviously everyone would know that. But I think that this crossover is, you do need to advertise both. But it's where you do that and how you do that that's the question.
I think your piece about content is really interesting, and I think what we see is a lot of B2B, typically maybe component manufacturers going through this journey from printed catalogue with their customers, released once a year, to a more online-based approach where they can instantly, updates go live quickly and they can make that change. And that's that speed to change of the offering, or speed to new products getting into markets is a real challenge we see with a lot of customers in the B2B space. And then looking at, the bit we get involved in is how you then localize that and take that international. It's a big change, and I think in that area you definitely see the B2C stuff being quite a bit further ahead. But as things move on, we get, there's a big change just now, people giving up on these catalogues, looking to get stuff online. So this migration is front of mind for a lot of people, I think, but definitely something you'd see B2C being a step ahead on.
Okay, cool. Do we have any questions from the audience? If you want to put your hand up, and I think I'm bringing the mic to you today, so... No, not yet? Okay, we shall continue with my list in that case, but I will be coming back to you, so please get those thinking caps on if there's anything you want to ask, because this is a phenomenal panel of B2B minds. Okay, guys, I'm going to walk around this side, so I start blocking the view of the people on this side rather than that side for a change. Okay, come over, stand by you, Alex. So we've talked quite a bit there about marketing. Let's go to the far opposite end. Let's talk logistics. Is the B2B world the king of logistics, or is there a lot that can be learned from the B2C e-commerce world when it comes to getting that product out to the customer?
It's a very good one. I would say for the tracking process, very much. I mean, supply chain, as is stocking the product and making it available and delivering at the right time at the right place, it's very much the supply chain of the B2B side. But when we talk about tracking the product going towards the end user, this is very much the B2C reality. And when I move it from the manufacturer to the wholesaler in the B2B, I would say so that tracking was something scary. How can I track with the GPS? And again, I was talking about that today. It's very scary for the B2B business to share data. When you talk about tracking, you are opening, between brackets, your data. And the heads of the B2B companies, they are always against this kind of possibility of opening the data. For B2B, this is a daily job. Tracking, sharing of data, dashboard, and this is a very important part of the web commerce, I would say, platform when we talk about the digital.
I mean, Alex, you said earlier about a lot of your publicans, etc. They want to go to the the wholesaler and have their chat and find out the gossip and all the rest of it. Are you also having issues with distribution in terms of them starting to buy direct online?
So we don't supply direct online.
Okay.
We work only through wholesalers and cash and carry.
So for you, there's the logistics is whether they're influenced online or they're influenced offline, the logistics remain the same?
Yeah, I mean, what we do see is some of the wholesalers we work with, if they move online, quite often you'll see they're doing a top-up shop. So I've got one customer where you'll have a set delivery day a week, and that's your free delivery day. And if you need any emergency top-ups, there's actually a fee of sometimes up to 50 cents, maybe sometimes £70 to have that delivery done. So then you probably see the top-ups being done in maybe a cash and carry. And then I think where we're going to get to from a bar perspective is actually how can we get much more closer to the stock availability so it becomes an automated process. So I was in the Tesco presentation earlier today, and he was talking around how he's managed to loop his network, his Google or Alexa in to every time he turns his dishwasher on, he knows he's just used a tab of his dishwasher. You kind of want to get to that place where every time you serve a vodka, your 25 cl vodka, that's registered in your till, that's linked into your stock availability, and it goes, right, you need another bottle. That's where you need to get to in the future to be much more of an automated process rather than someone going, okay, my stocks are looking low, I need to put in a vodka, a gin, or whatever.
Yeah. Wow, the mind boggles at that point in terms of trend predictions and all the rest of it. I'm kind of stuck on that dishwasher tablet thing. So that's much better than a push button to reorder, isn't it? Because it's not James, I'm guessing in the car space, the logistics don't change a great deal, Do they between B2C or is it?
Well, in our industry, with the large fleet companies that we deal with, actually the experience they get is probably better than you would get as a retail customer at the moment. So if they order 1,000 vehicles, they'll know when they're actually being built at the factory, shipped, when they're stored, PDI'd, and they can pick them off and say how many they want delivered, and they will get delivered, and they'll know they'll be tracked the entire journey to where they're delivered back to them. But we are bringing that into our retail side as well, because I recognise that actually they're getting a better deal than the retail customers.
Yeah, so there's kind of like full in-flight tracking, as we'd say in the parcel world.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay, so you're teaching the B2C a few things.
Absolutely. Well, we get some vehicles where they have to be delivered to an end user as opposed to a company, and they're tracked. And those drivers, we have big screens, and you can see where they are at any one time.
Sounds like quite mesmerising for a Friday afternoon. I'm just going to watch the board. Cool.
Just on that, I think you're talking about the logistics, and it feels this is where, with Amazon coming on and people's expectations around that level of user experience, it's logistics that really add that in, right? So real-time tracking of where my delivery is going to get made, brilliant, right? But compared to where a lot of people just now, they'll find their experience of ordering something in work is very different to what they get when they've got Amazon Prime and they order it and it's same day. So I think that's the change that people are aware of, and just working out how do you deal with that challenge from some disruptors coming into the sector and trying to take that. Absolutely. You mentioned it before, Ricardo, right?
Absolutely, because 5-10 years ago they had the choice between learning or not. During the last 12 months, 2 years, it's a question of must.
Yeah.
Or they do that, or someone who is new on the marketplace, it's going to take the market share that you miss. And that is related to the tracking, the sharing of data, the opening of the mind, looking outside the box and learning. Because the B2C side is much more disruptive and open from the mindset point of view than the B2B. B2B is very conservative from the process point of view.
And of course the end customer, the human being who's doing the ordering, is both a B2C and a B2C B2B customer. Yeah. So would it be fair to say then that the B2B needs to learn and keep an eye on B2C, because that's what their customers are going to be demanding in the very near future?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the behavior of the purchase managers is changing in the B2B side. 5 years ago, they would say, I need to see the person face to face to take my decision. Okay. We're going to have a coffee, we're going to have a 3 hours lunch, we're going to have whatever was, I would say, the way of relationship. They would go in this direction. Nowadays, he goes online. And then the sales team who was loyal to him is complaining. 5 years ago, we are 20 years together. We should have a meeting to talk about it. Sorry, I don't have time. I have my manager, I have to save cost. He goes online.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any questions from the audience? You can put your hands up if you've got one for our panel. Trying to see you all beneath the lights. No? You're making me do we've got one. I was going to say you're making me do my work today, but no. I get to let you ask the questions. Here we go.
Cheers. Yeah, Frank Owen. Can you talk a little bit about payment systems and the difference between the etiquette and protocols of payment, and of course in the B2C world and the B2B, and how that's going to mirror across with e-commerce platforms?
Yes. I don't know if you saw my presentation before the panel. Everything related to B2C is credit card. Now we have the Bitcoins. Okay, it's a new trend. But then you have also debit card. Everything related to B2B, it depends on the system that the end user has. Sometimes it's EDI, but sometimes it's by invoicing. And then behind the invoicing, we have payment term discussions. Why payment term? Because 5-10 years ago, they had a meeting to talk about payment term. I'm paying you in 30 days. Now I want 60 days. Or I want 90 days. If you go to the B2C way of doing business, that discussion is gone. And that's not good for the end user, because then the cash flow is being touched. That's a very hot topic, but that is good for the B2B business, for the wholesaler who is selling to the end user, because he puts an end on that discussion. But for the end user who is buying, this is very tricky. It's a very good question.
I think it varies a lot by country as well. So you see a place like Russia with customers, and payment on delivery is very heavily used. So they're paying the delivery guy typically in cash when they arrive. Right now in B2B, you don't see much of that, but as this more, the expectation of the consumer gets to that stage, then how much do we need to be thinking at that level and introducing that whole level of complexity into different geographies to make sure, the challenge is, are we missing out on market share because we're not able to transact with people in the way they would want to?
Any further thoughts on payments? Alex James, were you good on payments? Okay, cool. Do we have another question from the audience? You put your hands up. Oh, yeah. I've got. Yeah, here we go. We've got 2 people wanting to ask questions now. I'm going to go here because you're closer. So.
Hi. I just wanted to know what your opinion was on B2B selling B2C and cutting out the retailer and almost competing with your customers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that do that now, and I was just wondering what your thought was on that.
I don't mind starting on that one. In the motor industry, that's been recognised as one of the biggest threats for dealers because manufacturers are going direct. So one of the things that we've done as a company is we have our PDI centres and we can hold lots of cars, and a PDI is pre-delivery inspection. So basically, when the manufacturers have the orders, they have to put the cars somewhere when they come in from the factories, and they have to be inspected before they get delivered. So if you don't do that, then they need somewhere to go. So they will sell directly to the end user, cutting out the dealers. And what we've sort of recognised that over the next few years, you're going to see probably the death of lots of motor dealers, lots of dealerships, and they will become service centres, and you'll get mega centres that sell where you can go and have a test drive and pick your car up. A bit like what's happening to the high street, really. In my opinion, it's the same principle and the same reasons it's happening. But of course, the only way to combat that is to be part of that middle system. So from us as a business, we're having to change how we run the business.
Any of the rest of you got some thoughts on how to sell direct to consumers if you're a B2B business? I guess I'll feed you some thoughts here. From my point of view, I think there's as big a learning curve to going e-commerce as there is to selling direct to consumer. Is that something you found?
So we've seen customers struggle with it, sort of kind of B2B2C piece, and I think particularly around the customer experience, the product choice they're able to offer from people who can say, here's all the different options you can choose from. As a single supplier, you can pick and choose what you want, rather than having to shop around and do the comparison from completely different brands. And I think they've found that the effort to go to in terms of getting that working has been significant compared to the return, rather than focusing on the existing distributors. Depend a lot per.
I think it's down to the product again. If you go on eBay or Amazon and you order something, quite often that will come from a manufacturer, and you'll have to wait a bit longer for it, but it'll come to you. So for the end user, that experience through a company like Amazon is the same. So that to me is the threat.
Absolutely. And I would say that the only way to block that chain is having services on top. When you sell products, that's the way, and that is happening. That is very disruptive. If you provide services on top, then you can block the chain. Then the manufacturer is not able to sell directly because you are a service provider, as we well said.
We actually have it the other way around. So we have quite a lot of trade shoppers will go into a Tesco if the vodka's on a deal, if it's on the end on a deal. The reality is sometimes that's cheaper than what it might be in a wholesaler. So we recognise, actually we see the switch the other way, and I suppose that's a thing, and we let it happen. And then conversely, we've got wholesalers that have direct-to-consumer platforms. So 31 Dover Drinks Supermarket are owned by wholesalers, and they will fulfil, and we'll support those fully. If we were to do that and offer our products out from a, supplier out to consumer, actually, is that the right thing to do? Because if I'm a consumer, do I differentiate the difference between an Absolute vodka and a Smirnoff vodka? Probably not. I'd probably get frustrated as to why I can't find a full range. And is that the right experience that we want to be demonstrating?
So let me expand on your question a bit, if that's okay. If we put ourselves in the shoes of a manufacturer, and the manufacturer is very, very keen and it's the right strategy to start trying to take some of that additional margin by going direct to the consumer, should they be going for a marketplace selling platform, or should they be building their own B2C e-commerce website and all that goes with that? Anyway, just a little question for you there, guys.
Very good one.
We had one. So we had a direct-to-consumer site, but the reality is it's the logistics, it's the warehouse. There's a lot of cost involved in setting that up. Just even, as a business that we're geared up to send out pallets of product. We're not geared out to send one product or two products. So do we want to be doing that? Probably not. Is that the right way for us to do it? No. Is a marketplace a good place to start? Yeah, I think it is. And actually, the direct-to-consumer sites, that we work with, they also all sell through someone like Amazon. We know that happens, and we can see that. We work with them directly as well. It's one of those things that I think they just go hand in hand.
And again, it depends on the country as well. In the mature countries, I would say the federations of distributors, they block that. Let's take an example, Germany. If we start to do that in Germany, the Federation of Distributors in Germany, they cut it. They go to the federation and they block the manufacturer. If you go to Brazil, to Mexico, to China, emerging countries, where there is no policy yet, the manufacturers, they go directly. Higher profitability, they touch the end users, they own the customers, and the customers, they are willing to buy from them, because these new countries are very much digital.
You'll
It's
find
a very
us,
good question.
the manufacturers that have franchises are the ones that will do it first, because to them, shutting a store down is no loss to them. Whereas if you own the store, of course, you've got all that included. So
Absolutely.
I think from our perspective, Vauxhall dealers, they're all franchises. So if Vauxhall went direct, it wouldn't be a huge hit to them, because people tend to think of Vauxhall as opposed to their local dealer when they're looking at vehicles anyway.
Okay, cool. We had another question over here. Is that still valid? Yeah. I'm coming. Before we disappear down Marketplaces Alley.
No, it's very much the same question, because what we see happening in with the bricks and mortar, there is the concept that you don't sell to a customer's customer. But as a wholesaler, even though we're growing our wholesaler, we do have to move into that region. And it's what's the balance that you don't upset your customer, but you do want to sell to his customer? I'm just not quite sure what's the best balance.
I think where we've seen it work well is entering new geographies. So going into a new market where you don't have the complexity of an existing relationship that you're upsetting someone is a great, especially using a marketplace, a great low-cost way to try something out and see what kind of return you're getting before maybe investing more and doing setting up your own sites end to end. I think also looking at stock that's maybe less interesting to that isn't performing as well. So you've got redundant stock on your hand. You maybe want to discount it and offload it. Things like that, we've seen customers have real success with. I think there's obviously going to be a conflict there, right, where you're going and competing with your distributor on the ground, and it's going to be tricky, I guess, to find the answer.
And again, here I would touch base on the services as the second part of the business. When you provide services, that's the way to block that kind of conflict. Let's take an example, lamps. When you buy lamps for your flat, you go to the B2B, the home centers, or you go online. But tomorrow, if a B2B wholesaler comes to you with a platform telling you, you can buy the lamps, but I'm gonna send somewhere to a flat to tell you if you are buying the right lamp, and on top, I'm gonna do free of charge a prescription of lamps for your flat. You block completely the chain. Then Amazon, any other web provider, they will be blocked. But that is an amazing question again, because in Germany, we had that problem. And in Germany, a few years ago, some of the wholesalers, they started to sell directly to the end users by web sales, including services. What happened? The Federation of the Services Providers blocked the chain. It's exactly the same discussion. The manufacturer was going to the end user, and then the wholesalers, they block it. And then the wholesalers, they said, don't worry, we're gonna build the digital platform. They have done that. When they saw that it was working, they said, let's make it more profitable and let's provide services to protect us. And then the services provider, the third part of the business, they said, you cannot do that because we are the providers of services. And then the wholesaler said, but you don't have a digital platform. You must build it. But I mean, we are talking about Germany. The level of maturity is very high. They can have this kind of discussion.
Is part of your question as well, is that if you did it as your business, as your wholesale business, then the people you sell to would know that you're doing it. So what you could do is use a third-party website that you build that's a different name to your company, and you invoice internally. And it's ethical, it's not unethical, it just means it's masked a little bit.
It's very smart.
I like that. It's ethical, but it's unethical.
No, I think it is ethical, but
It
you know, of course, if you found out
legal.
by your suppliers, they might, you know, they get upset, but that's what some companies do.
And it's legal.
Yeah.
It's quite
Very
common,
much.
isn't it,
Yeah.
actually?
Oh, yes.
But strangely enough, you don't hear a lot about that, weirdly enough.
But that was your question, sorry, gentlemen? Okay.
Okay, do we have another question from the audience? If you could put your hand up and I'll come over to you with the mic. Not at the moment. Okay. We've talked about a lot of different areas so far in our overall point of view on what the B2B e-commerce world can learn from the B2C. I think probably one of the biggest areas we haven't really talked about is kind of culture and skills, because we've touched on the fact that if you're going to start selling to consumers, that's a huge learning curve, a huge change. We've talked about how starting to sell e-commerce in the B2B space is a huge change. I guess what are the key skills that, as B2B e-commerce people, you would like to poach from the B2C e-commerce businesses that are in this hall today? Who fancies jumping in on that one?
I mean, I would start with the customer journey. I mean, it's obvious, but it's very important to highlight. When I was working in the manufacturer is always looking to the customers as a strategy. When you go and you work for a wholesaler, the wholesaler is always looking to the suppliers, to the manufacturers, before going towards the customers, because that came from the supply chain DNA. But now, the end user, the customer is becoming the focus, the driver of the relationship. And then the wholesaler is swapping from the supply chain point of view to the customer journey. And that is very much the B2C business model.
I suppose we're talking about a business model where you've allowed the customer journey to be managed by individuals to a point where, and one-on-one relationships to a point where you've got to try and automate and do that on a bigger scale.
Absolutely.
And when you have no visibility of what the customer's
Absolutely.
up to.
You don't shake hands anymore.
But
That's very disruptive from the culture point of view, very much.
But that should make it an easier transition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And saving cost.
Yeah.
Any further thoughts on skills to
Just
poach?
the more, it's sort of extending on Carl's point, the more you can get to know the customer, the easier it's going to be to identify the quick wins. That mean maybe it is going to be same day or next day delivery. That's the thing that really impacts. Then you can focus on solving specific things that will really impact the customer experience. So getting closest to the customer, which probably the sort of specific skill set will vary by company, right? But
Yeah.
from my thoughts, from my experience, it's probably where
I think as long as you've got a good customer care policy,
Customer care,
the actual process of selling and the rest of it is all the same. But you need a contact for them if there's an issue. Because if you're buying anything off Amazon or eBay, as long as that process goes smoothly, you know you don't need anyone to look after you. You're doing that yourself, and that's what customers now want a lot more. It's like going to a supermarket and going to the automated checkout. Why do you do that? You don't want to talk to someone or talk about the weather. It's a choice, and I think that's what we're looking at. The consumer that makes that choice will be happy to buy without that interaction. So actually, it makes it an easier job.
Surely there's still a role for the human being, partly playing devil's advocate here, but there's still a role for the human being, because I think however deeply you feel in your heart that you are a self-service checkout person, and I deeply feel I am a self-service checkout person, I still sometimes feel the need to go through the manned checkout because there's bulky things, or I want a bit more time to pack, or actually maybe I even fancy a conversation with a real life human being. Strange. But I think that is also the case in B2C e-commerce, B2B e-commerce rather, that you have automation a lot of the times, but it makes the times when the customer wants to speak to a human being via live chat, via phone, via face-to-face, even more crucial to get right, because it's usually when there's a problem or an urgency or something like that.
The customer care,
Yeah. Alex?
I think it is, and I think that's absolutely right. We all need to talk to someone, or at least feel like you are, even if it's with a chatbot or something at some point. You want that. The biggest issue I have that I see in a lot of my customers at the moment is that they're trying to move them all online because there's a cost efficiency in doing so, because it's already a delivered business. The problem you've got is that the dog and duck down the road normally does their order online, does it every Thursday, but come Thursday lunchtime, they've still not placed their order. So instead of doing an email or a text prompt or however it may be, you get someone phoning up going, oh, hi, you've not done your order this week, can I help you? And actually the biggest issue you've got is that you're moving their habits that have already been online, or they're trying to move online, you're trying to almost push them back to telesales. So it's about the connectivity in the right way, so how you're delivering the consistent message on the journey that they want to be on, or the journey, if I'm honest, that you want them to be on. But then how are they easily available in the right way when they need help? So how, we've done a lot of work from a consumer perspective on chatbots. I think there's loads that can be done in that respect, because quite often a lot of the questions are the same, and there'll be a lot of familiarity and crossover. And, we talk... I talk quite a lot around how a lot of my wholesalers are going, okay, how can we streamline telesales? But it's actually not so they're made redundant. It's redeploy them in the business, generate sales in a better way. The reality is some of those telesales staff are going to go into tech support. They're going to go into, probably still going to have a bay of people that will do that, because, like you say, you always need that contact. But it's making sure that people know the primary routes to contact people in the right way.
That's a good
On
point.
a per customer basis. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, and we see that a lot similar setup where it's saying, so rather than having salespeople on the ground who are kind of effectively order takers, going out and filling out forms, it's actually how much can you add, still have people doing that role, but adding value in terms of making sure they're more doing the educational piece, or the customer support, customer service piece, so really trying to improve the user experience and putting the more transactional element online, and then you feel like you're not having people do stuff that could be automated, but you're actually adding value at every step of the process as they go through it.
And that was the discussion this morning about how the smartphones could support the B2B and B2C interaction in terms of people. And I don't remember the name of the speaker, but he did well. He said, that's the middle term between face-to-face and online, because at least you have the SMS. An SMS, it's okay. That means that the person is in contact with me. It's not like WhatsApp, but we are speaking on the phone between brackets. I like it when he said that. And basically, if we put ourselves in the shoes of the B2B customer, you don't need the person, the sales team visiting you every day anymore. As we saw here, once a month just to have a reference as contact, and then the SMS is in the middle of the way just to keep, I would say, the two parts in contact.
It strikes me that it leads to kind of cleverer deployment of manpower when you open up those online channels, because no longer is it, your salespeople are constantly out on the road visiting everybody. They can now focus on the top customers, or the customers where you can see an opportunity, rather than it being a one-size-fits-all scenario.
The ownership of the customer.
Yeah,
but also a focus on the messaging. So we've got field sales team that will go into outlets, and a lot of it, for example, our quality team will be going in around if you've got the right serve of Guinness, if your line's clean, do you know how to pour it? They'll also have like a whole list of things that they need to talk about. But actually, is that the right thing to do? So it could be that you create a more tailored experience and go, okay, we know that we need to focus on Guinness, but actually I've seen that they've been interested at X, Y, Z, and let's go talk to them about those things because they looked but didn't spy, or whatever it might be. So it is a more tailored approach based on what you know about them.
And using the additional intelligence you've learned from online to help the field sales team.
And our field sales team working with my wholesalers field sales team, because we need to be aligned on messaging and utilise the headcount in the right way to maximise those sales.
Okay, let's see if we got Oh, an eager question over here. There we go.
How do you feel that SEO and pay-per-click PPC is going to be transformed from B2C into B2B, and do you feel that you might start to compete against your downstream sellers if you are competing on the same terms for pay-per-click and SEO?
I do believe on the conflict and competition between the parts. There is no way to avoid that, because in the end, as we said, the maturity in terms of digital changes part by part. If you are a manufacturer, if you are a wholesaler, or if you are retail. If the maturity is not the same, and the three are looking to the same customer, in the end, they will conflict each other. And that's the reason why we have a lot of newcomers jumping on it. Because the newcomers, there is no history, there is no conflict, they don't know anything about the channel, and they have access to the same customer who is willing to save cost. Because the interaction between the human being is getting less and less important.
Yeah.
And then again, I touch base on the services. I guess the only way to avoid that is providing services, maybe together.
I wonder, just putting my own 2 pence in here, I wonder if on the subject of SEO and pay-per-click, because you're clearly going after exactly the same keywords a lot of the time. If we take the example of Guinness again, Guinness is Guinness is Guinness. There's not a word for the B2B customer and a word for the B2C customer. So I would, actually I've just realised this is a bad example, because obviously when someone searches for Guinness, they should find the brand page, which serves everybody, shouldn't they, I suppose?
And kegs and surger,
Yeah.
which might not mean a lot to anyone else, but actually they're specific trade terms that, as a consumer, you're not going to know what a surger is. So there's differentiation, but yeah, you're right, there's a big commonality.
And I think with that, when it comes down to the commonality, what I would have thought you're going to find is that the person who makes the most money out of it is going to win. So there may be competition as they start on it, but actually the chances are whoever's making the most money out of it will win, because it's a natural auction. So on the SEO front, my guess would be the consumer side are going to win on the big terms because there's more of them, and on the on the pay-per-click side, it's going to vary. Any thoughts on that from the panel?
I'd probably, to an extent, because if I'm honest, if I'm a pub or whatever it may be, it's quite difficult for me to get an account set up with loads and loads of different wholesalers. It's quite a manual piece. You have to have your invoicing, be credit checked. You are naturally not as promiscuous a shopper as you would be if you were a grocery shopper and you go, okay, I'm going to go Asda, Tesco, Sainsbury's, whatever it may be. You can move around more freely because you don't have to go through those checks. Now, where we were talking about the credit terms and things changing in the future potentially, then it could make it more, I suppose, easier to do that. And maybe because you did cash, you did cash on delivery or whatever it would be, maybe that changes that scenario because you don't have that check. But I think there's still in my mind, there's still a hell of a long way to go, because I'd like my customers to get their on-site search right before they focus on the off-site.
I think from what we found with pay-per-click is a manufacturer will have slightly different message anyway, because they're more generic, whereas we'd be more targeted on what we need to sell. So I think it's down to product again, which would make a difference to if you're going to compete with the same search term, because you may have the same keywords, but actually your ad will say something different, which will attract the customer as opposed to a business. But that's down to what you're selling again.
Sounds like there's quite a big old space for remarketing in there as well, be it cookie-based or something else.
And the common protection of the price, because when we have a channel conflict, the risk is that there is a price erosion for the future. An example is the IT industry. How much did you pay for a printer 10, 15 years ago? The printers that we have at home, how much we pay for it today? They have a conflict of channel 10, 15 years ago. We could buy printers only in the IT distributors 10, 15 years ago. Today, we buy printer everywhere. Retail, home centers, online, everywhere. And the price went down. Why? Because in the past, the channels, they didn't see the market together. They saw by individual behavior, the end users. And that is related to his question, because then you have a manufacturer, wholesaler, retail, and end users in the same basket, trying to get the same customer. And then in the end, the profitability, the risk is that the profitability goes down.
Well, the applause from next door reminds me that unfortunately we now have to end this panel session. I think this has been fascinating, and I think what we've learned is there's a lot B2C can learn from B2B and a lot B2B can learn from B2C. If I got all the B's and the C's in the right places there, I think you know what I mean. So all it remains for me to do in this instance is to thank our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.